It's Britney, bitch.
Welcome back to this special episode of Petty Astrology, an astrological variety show hosted by me, Kaycee Felton-Lui. This is part one of a two-part conversation about the astrology of Britney Spears, who recently released a memoir titled The Woman in Me. I'm not a celebrity person. In fact, I'm pretty critical of celebrity worship in general. I think we spend too much time being advertised to and calling that culture. And famous people are a part of the culture, sure, but I think it's important to remember that celebrities are just people with a different level of resources and visibility. After Britney Spears spoke publicly about the abuse she endured under a 13-year court-ordered conservatorship, I wanted to hear what she had to say about this experience because for so long we've been fed so many narratives about Britney. She was this perfect Christian pop princess, then she was a cheater, then wild and out of control, and then later out of her mind, but also always this powerhouse with album after album and tour after tour. But every time I heard her speak up and use her voice, there's this enormous clarity about her that makes me feel like a lot of what has been said about Britney Spears is distortion. And I think that a lot of that distortion has been used to diminish a human being to the point where even with all of her privileges, she still had her freedom taken away. So for me, talking about the astrology of Britney Spears is about advocating for her voice, her individuality, and her humanity. It's about the fact that even if someone is struggling, I don't believe they deserve to be isolated and totally disempowered or have the mental health system used against them. And what says the holiday season more than family trauma, right? For this conversation, I'm joined by fellow astrologers Jen and Mackenzie. We talked for 2.5 hours and could have gone much longer, so part 2 will come out next week. So make sure you're subscribed to Petty Astrology. Before we get started, just know that if you share any astrological placements with Britney Spears, what we say in these episodes may not necessarily apply to you. That's how astrology works. It's not one size fits all. So don't make it personal and hurt your own feelings, all right? All right, on to the show. I had not anticipated doing a podcast episode about Britney Spears, but I happened to start the audiobook and I just felt like it was too interesting to not talk about the astrology of Britney Spears and her memoir and finally speaking out about all of the really intense things that have happened to her over the course of her life. And it's been so many years of us just hearing about Britney Spears and kind of getting pieces of what she has said and done and people trying to figure out what's going on with her and if she's okay. And so finally having the opportunity to hear her in her own words at length describe what she's been through was really interesting. So I decided that it would be a great topic for a bonus episode to kind of get us back in the groove of this podcast and to talk about something that really interests all of us. I am joined once again by Jen Russell.
Excited to talk about Britney. She's had such an interesting life, and to hear it directly from her, what has been actually going on from her perspective is so fascinating, especially since we have an accurate birth time.
What was your relationship to Britney Spears prior to reading this?
I just really listened to her music like when it was on the radio, and growing up my sister had her CDs, so she was always like on in the house. Yeah, I just really liked her popular songs. Like it was my childhood, so it's very nostalgic to like go back and listen to this stuff and see what has happened in her life as a result of all of that success that she had very young, and how that kind of played out with like the social norms at the time that were pushed on her. It's just fascinating.
So we've got astrologer Mackenzie Wollenzien here. What is your relationship with Britney Spears?
Oh my gosh. It goes way back. So I think it all started when I had this neighbor growing up who was my babysitter, and she like loved Britney Spears. And so I think I just started listening to her when I was probably like 3. And I remember someone asked me who my favorite singer was when I was in like preschool. And I said, Britney Spears. And I don't know if you guys remember like those hit clips, but I had like
Yes.
Britney Spears hit clips, and then it evolved into her CDs, and I had like Britney Spears backpack. So I was a little obsessed, but it just continued, and I watched her movie Crossroads that we recently watched. Yeah, I've always loved her, and I saw her in concert in 2009. And so reading her book and like reading about what she was going through at that time, it was just like, I just felt terrible that she was even like on stage to begin with, but I still loved her, and she did amazing. But yeah, and I think I even like started dance because of her, like just love her.
Wow. That's amazing. And I'm sure she would be really pleased to hear that she inspired you to do something that you really loved doing.
Yes, yeah.
She loves kids. That was really clear from her book, and she said it in interviews over the years. She's really into kids, and she's done work with kids, teaching them, how to sing and dance and perform. So I think that's really cool that we get to talk to such a big fan in this episode. My relationship with Britney Spears is kind of a combo, I guess, of the two of you. I was not a super fan necessarily. I would say I was a casual fan. I was right at the age that, when Britney Spears became a name that everybody knew. I was at the perfect age to be advertised Britney, right? I was, 9 years old, 10 years old when her first albums were coming out. And her music was like on at every birthday party, and, it was on TV. She was everywhere. She was enormously popular. And so it was like I had her albums. I never got to see her live. I really would have liked to, though, now that I've seen so much footage of her performing and how much she gives it. I wish that I had seen that as a kid. I think it would have been really fun. At the time that her conservatorship started, it was right about the time that I was becoming an adult. And so I had a lot on my plate, and there was a lot of I caught bits and pieces of what was going on with her in the news, and she was everywhere, and everything that was happening with her was everywhere. And there was so much assumption about what was going on and things that people were accusing her of doing, substance abuse, things like that, mental health issues, a lot of people projecting without necessarily having good information. And I just remember her being everywhere. I think now with hindsight, I can see what a good example she is of just our culture's relationship to women, and particularly women that are considered, she was a sex symbol. She still is a sex symbol in a lot of ways. And I think that because of that, there was a lot of entitlement about how she was spoken about and the things that she was accused of doing and the way that the media treated her and the way that viewers and consumers treated her was really overwhelming, I would say, at that time. And not knowing all of the details, it was a really interesting thing to watch from afar. So just as the years have gone by and more information has come out about what was happening to her, I was even more intrigued about what she had experienced, because I think that when the Free Britney movement started, there was not a lot of clarity on what was actually true. It was just hard to tell what was real and what was not. So to finally have her account of what happened in full was really interesting to sit down and listen to and read. I'm not the only one. Apparently, this book sold 1.1 million copies, and worldwide, it sold 2.4 million copies in print sales during its first week of release. So, we all have some connection to Britney Spears, whether it's you just heard her on the radio all the time, because she was everywhere, and in some ways she still is everywhere in a certain sense. Like, people are always going to be interested in what Britney Spears is doing. I thought it would be really a good conversation for us to have and to talk about the astrology of Britney Spears and some of the astrology of her experience. This is not a culture that has a lot of respect for people that are going through difficulty, whatever the difficulty is, whether it is substance abuse or mental health issues. There's really not a lot of compassion. And I think that her story is a really great example culturally of just what that can look like. And even if you are someone as big and famous and wealthy as Britney Spears, something like this can happen to you. You can be institutionalized, you can be legally denied rights. And I think that that's something that everybody should be concerned about, regardless of your opinion of Britney Spears. and particularly with women, because women and people that are of marginalized genders, I think, are on the front lines in terms of people that have to deal with the repercussions of what our mental health system and our carceral system look like. And of course, that's all compounded if you are not white. Britney was born in Macomb, Mississippi on December 2nd, 1981. So that gives her a Libra rising. She is a Sagittarius sun and Mercury. She's got a Capricorn Venus, a Virgo Mars, and an Aquarius moon. Britney's a Southern girl. I think that that is so fundamental to understanding who she is as a person, right? Where she comes from. She grew up in a small town in Kentwood, Louisiana. So Brittany opens the book talking about how her paternal grandfather was kind of an asshole. He had a wife that lost a child and apparently was grieving that loss. He, for whatever reason, decided to institutionalize her. Apparently, when she was released, she ended up dying by suicide on the grave of her child that she had lost. So really just a dramatic opening. And I think what Brittany's point in including this was to contextualize this tool in her family, the fact that her grandfather had done this to not only her grandmother, but a subsequent wife that he was married to, he again institutionalized. So apparently this was a tool that he used to deal with the women in his life that he no longer wanted to have around. It was just a convenient way for him to get them out of the way, it sounds like. I had never heard this about Britney's family, so this was really quite shocking to me, the fact that this is already something that had happened in her family. The main reason that I think a lot of people are reading this is to hear about her experience under this conservatorship, right? Because the things that she has said about it have been so dramatic. She has essentially described herself as somebody that had almost no agency in her life. And so to hear that this is something that had happened already in her family was pretty interesting. So she also talks about how her father was a victim of abuse through his experience with his father. He was apparently a basketball player, and his father forced him to shoot hoops over and over and over and over for hours on end. He wasn't allowed to even come inside the house until he had done that. So hearing the extremes that her father's family had gone through and the abuse that it sounds like her father endured sets us up for her childhood. And, just like looking at her chart, even on first glance, she has a first house Saturn. There's this sense that the role that her father has played in her life has been really significant. She says so in the book. She talks about his substance abuse issues. She says that he had a problem with alcohol and that in her childhood, a lot of their family's behavior was dictated by whether or not her father was drinking. Mm-hmm. And so anybody that has gone through an experience like that knows that having parents with substance abuse issues is enormously stressful on the children. And I'm sure, the other parent, she talks about her parents fighting quite a bit. They actually got divorced at one point and then later resumed their relationship. So, you get the sense that things with Britney's family were definitely not easy. And even so, I feel like she talking about her childhood is still very nostalgic for it, right? The small town. She talks about all of her friends and how they would get together and play and drive around in go-karts, and they were in the parade. It kind of sounds idyllic in certain ways. And then there's also this backdrop of, dad being inconsistent, dad having these strange behavioral issues, potentially because of the drinking. Dad had a business and then the business did well and then it was not doing well. And so it sounds like money issues. I had no idea that Britney was working in a deli and boiling crawfish at age 9. She had a full-blown job and was bringing home money for her family, it sounds like. And it's interesting the way that I'm kind of phrasing things. I'm hearing myself kind of talk around things in a certain way and be very careful about what I'm saying. And what's funny is that I really felt that that was kind of how she approached the book. And I don't think that she was necessarily trying to withhold information, but I felt that Libra rising so strongly as I was listening to her words,
Mhm.
because there is so much that she says, and then there's so much that she doesn't say. And I found what she doesn't say in this book very loud. You know, everything that she says about her childhood, she talks about being from the South. She talks about manners, how even today she's still very sir, very ma'am when she addresses people. There's a politeness, there's a decorum with that Southern culture. There's an expectation, especially I feel like with women, about how you behave and how you look and being presentable in a certain way. And I felt that so strongly with just how she explains herself throughout this book. You know, certainly that was all in there as well.
Listening to her home life, it felt like inside of her home is where a lot of the like abuse happened. It was like mental, emotional, and that's a lot, you know, especially for she's got her Mercury conjunct Uranus. Probably didn't help with some anxieties if she had any. And so just listening to that, but it sounded like outside of her home, she was really happy. And so I'm just like really glad she had that. And throughout the book, she talked multiple times about like having this sense of an escape. And I don't know if that's her Neptune in that third house. She talked a lot about singing and dancing was her way to escape, and even like walking outside and getting outside and like laying on the rocks. I thought that was very Virgo on the 12th house. So it's like she developed coping mechanisms really young that I think were very healthy.
It really does feel like performing and music and dance and gymnastics were the things that she reached for to survive her childhood and the stresses that were happening around her. She has a fifth house Aquarius moon, and I feel like she channels her emotions through her creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like she was very much the kid in the family that was always performing and singing and dancing around. So, of course, it makes sense that her family put her in gymnastics, dance lessons. They were driving her an hour plus away at certain points and taking her to competitions. Her mother was really involved in her childhood creative career, I guess you could call it. And, you know, that's also that fifth house moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she, in certain ways, was very supported doing what she was interested in doing. And obviously, you can have all kinds of debate about what the boundaries of children working in entertainment, you know, there's a lot of debate around that and what it does to a kid. But Britney was definitely being seen and heard in a professional sense from a very early age. We have footage of her. She can't be older than like 6 or 7 years old, belting out in singing competitions and stuff like that. So the performance aspect of her childhood is super strong. And of course, she was a Mouseketeer. She performed and entered tons of competitions. So, in a certain sense, like Britney has been working for her whole life. It certainly didn't feel like there was any resentment around that. She never says anything about being forced to perform or anything like that. She paints it as if it was a great thing in her childhood. She says that she was very well supported. So she got to do the Disney Mouseketeer thing, and then she came back to her small town. So it sounds like there was this really interesting period of her life where she was both a small town kid and then going to these big cities to compete, audition, perform. And then she eventually gets a record deal with Jive Records at age 15, which is pretty incredible. Holy shit. I can't even imagine being 15 years old and having a record deal. Like, what?
Wow.
She's living the Hannah Montana lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so few kids that kind of get this experience where they almost get to do both. She's 15 years old with a record deal. She records that first album that came out in 1999, Baby One More Time. And then in 2000, she drops Oops, I Did It Again. Both of those ended up being among the best-selling albums of the time. And she was the best-selling teenage artist of all time. So she, at an early age, had already broken all these records and was enormously successful. For her second album, Oops, I Did It Again, the first week of sales was over 1.3 million copies, and it held the record for the fastest selling album by a female artist in the United States for 15 years.
Yay.
Yeah,
It's incredible.
I remember that music being everywhere at the time. Like, she was everywhere. She was huge.
Well, and this was around the time where she had Pluto conjunct her sun and Mercury and all of that. Like, she was blowing up during that time. So it's like crazy when you can see it in the transits.
And it's a good thing to point out, right? Because in pop astrology, everybody's afraid of Pluto because they don't understand what's going on. So this just goes to show that a Pluto transit is not necessarily a bad thing, right? This is when Miss Britney Spears blew up. So by age 19, she was doing better than anybody ever had at her age. She did more than just sing, right? She was doing these music videos that were very choreographed, and she was also incredibly beautiful, and she was marketed like you couldn't believe. She was really, really everywhere in a way that maybe for people that are even 10 years younger than me, it's kind of hard to conceive, because I think as the years have gone by, we have so many more options, I guess, for people that we kind of fan over. And this was a time where media was a lot more concentrated than it is now. So everybody knew who Britney Spears was. You know, she was a 19-year-old girl. I can't even imagine what it was like on her end to experience this massive transition in such a short period of time. But she's got that beautiful Capricorn Venus trine her Virgo Mars, and it shows because she seems like she has been busting her ass this entire time. You know, I'm sure that over all of those years of her childhood, meeting different people, being referred to different people who could see that she was talented and wanted to help her out, I'm sure that that helped quite a lot. But it's just kind of a remarkable thing that she was able to do. And she's not a Nepo baby. You know, she's a kid who worked boiling crawfish at age 9. So she moved herself into just like a completely different echelon.
I think that's just like a beautiful expression of that Scorpio second house, able to transform that, like what she was going through at the time with her family that she's talked about, of her father being an alcoholic and things not being very good at home, and she was just worried. So she was, hard worker, but she kind of, I think she liked it, you know? She was a Capricorn Venus. She's not against busting her ass, but it's the fact that that was taken advantage of by her family, it seems like.
That Venus is in the 4th house. She was bringing home money, it sounds like, for her family. And she also mentions in the book, kind of in passing, that she did buy her mom a home and settled debts for her father. So that money was going to more than just her at that point. And so she really was like financing her family, at least to some degree. And, you know, it sounds like they were a big part, especially her mother, were a big part of her getting to where she.
Yeah, she was like really well supported in her ventures. I love that for her. She was like obsessed with being creative and expressing herself in the way she danced, the way she sang. She said that was like her sword growing up while she was going through so much. It was a really powerful little thing, like especially with that Sagittarius 3rd house, that being like her early childhood, that she was a truth sayer from the beginning, you know. She's gonna speak her mind. She's got Uranus conjunct.
It seems like from an early age, in terms of what I could see about that period of time where she released her first album, it seemed like she really had taste. You know, she had discerning taste about what she wanted to put out in the world, and she wanted it to be things that, you know, her friends would like, kind of a thing. She had a certain perspective, and it almost feels like she had more agency in her performance or singing, her dancing, than she did anywhere else in her life. So in that sense, I can see also how that was freeing for her in a way.
At one point, she even said, like, during this time, it's like she didn't really care as much because it was almost like there's freedom in being anonymous, and she could look out into a crowd and think to herself, you don't know who I am yet. And so it was just like liberating that no one really cared if she made mistakes. And she said that in her book, and I thought that was really interesting. That aspect of just like putting it all out there, I think that's really ignited like her Sagittarius expansion. And with Pluto conjunct those planets, it was such a huge power up. So
Yeah, guys, Pluto isn't scary. You can use these transits to power up.
You could become the next best-selling teen pop singer if you play your cards right.
Think about that next time that you're complaining.
Absolutely. So the marketing for her was on another level because, of course, when you have these pop stars that go out and do really well, you have these studios behind them. They want to make their money back. They just invested a bunch of money in this 15-year-old and they want to make their money back. So they made it back in spades with her, but they want to keep making money. And so she had backpacks. She had, all kinds of stuff that you could buy with her face on it. And for people that were in my age group and Mackenzie's age group, we were just the little consumers that the culture wanted us to be, right? Because you could get, Britney Spears lollipops, like everything that you could want. She was everywhere. She was really well marketed. And part of that marketing campaign was also, they put her in a movie called Crossroads, which was actually written by Shonda Rhimes. She was about 20 years old when they filmed that. And it was a movie about a girl in high school. Very dramatic. They tried to get her to branch out from just the singing and performing, which is what most people knew her for at that point. So she did the movie thing. Right around the time that first album came out is around the time that she started dating her Mouseketeer co-star, Justin Timberlake, also from NSYNC. And NSYNC was also huge at the time. So two of these people that were extremely famous in the pop world at that time were dating each other. So it's always kind of been this touchstone, I think, culturally that people have referred back to, because it's funny. It's almost like if you were to write a movie, like this is the kind of storyline that would be put in. It's just like, of course, like, let's have Britney Spears date Justin Timberlake.
You get their iconic matching jean outfits that's just so Barbie and Ken. Like, that's everything that was being marketed. She was like the ideal, but it seemed like she kind of liked being girly and like that. I mean, she's from the South. Like, that's kind of the culture,
I think she even picked those outfits out, the jean outfits. She was like, let's do this.
Yeah, the way she was describing it, she had a lot of creative input actually at this time, and she was so happy with the people she was working with. And when she talked about the Dream Within a Dream tour, that was kind of her favorite because these people respected her as an artist and let her be creative in a way that she didn't really get later on. She's always been very thankful for her fans, I think, giving her this opportunity to express herself. I think that just makes her little moon in the fifth house so happy. I think she feels very seen by her fans the more that she's being able to interact with them and see the support that they have for her and the real love, because I think it's easy to, especially with the people she was surrounded by, to forget that.
They did a good job, I think, of keeping her really grounded, because at this point, her family was still very involved in her career from all of the interviews and footage from back then that I've seen. You see her on tour calling her mom, and there's all kinds of input. She also had a longtime assistant was a family friend that she was also very close with. And so I think that she had these little pieces of home with her, regardless of where she was on tour or what she was doing in the studio. She seemed like she really kind of kept her head on straight, which is really impressive for somebody that is like shooting to this level of fame. She was just like working really hard, performing, cranking out one album after the other that were doing really well, and, doing all the appearances and things that celebrities do. But at this time, she was doing those things with Justin Timberlake. She describes herself being like head over heels in love with him. They had a really strong connection. It's really interesting because this was also this early period in her career where at some point, some interview happened where somebody asked her something that I personally would think is way too invasive to ask a young woman, but talking about her sexuality. And she said something about wanting to wait for a marriage to have sex. And the media seemed to really seize on this because I remember as, a young kid at this time, taking in a lot of this information about Britney Spears as a virgin and how that was like a hot topic, which is so creepy to think about now. I think that it's remarkable that this was 20 years ago. And I don't see that this conversation could have even happened in the same way. And I don't think that people would have stood for it. The fact that people were sitting there speculating about whether or not Britney Spears was still a virgin. And it was something that just kept coming up. At the time, I was a kid that was in an evangelical school, and one of my sets of parents is evangelical. So I remember that the conversation around her virginity, it really stuck out to me because it was so the opposite of what media was portraying at the time. And then meanwhile, I'm in this environment that's very like sex bad. So it was an interesting kind of thing for somebody that was a pop star, was like out there wearing really cute clothes and doing dances that people would say were very provocative. There was a lot of controversy about the way that she presented herself, sexuality, having any sense of sexuality as a young woman, displaying that, wearing clothes that were considered too revealing. That was a huge topic at the time. And it seems kind of quaint now where we are, but it was very interesting. And then in this book, she reveals that meanwhile, everyone's speculating about her virginity, she's living in Orlando, Florida, in a home with Justin Timberlake. Definitely not a virgin, right? I found that really surprising because of that narrative at the time. It was so focused around what she was doing sexually, and it was very creepy. Side note, I will just say that the image of Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake living in Orlando, Florida in the early 2000s could not be more perfect. I could not imagine a better scenario for these two Barbies. You know what I mean? Like this...
Right. Yeah.
This Orlando couple, this fire Orlando couple. One of the things that she mentions during this part is talking about how she ended up getting pregnant with Justin and she ultimately decided to have an abortion. She says that it was really more of Justin's desire to not be a father at that point that led her to having this abortion. And then because of her being well known enough to garner attention at that point, she was instructed to have an at-home medication abortion. And she apparently was not well informed on what that could feel like and said it was a very traumatic experience for her and it was very painful. And she also mentions that Justin Timberlake decided to play guitar for her as she was crying on the floor, which...
What a weirdo.
I guess he's gotten a lot of flack for that.
It just feels like it's almost like she talks about things like before Jess and I broke up and then like after. That was a huge moment. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but we all know they don't end up together. But
spoiler alert.
What blew my mind was he ended their relationship over a text. Like, over a text. They're like the biggest couple in the world, basically. Like, it was just like,
oh my God.
Yeah, really. It's almost like he was a pillar to her. And I don't know if this is part of her Libra rising, but almost like needing to be like, there's two. I don't know if that helped make her feel more stable, secure, and like able to put herself out in the world. And then it's like, after he just completely abandoned her after this huge trauma of having to do this abortion that she didn't even want to do, it's like he just left her without a leg to stand on. And it's really, really sad. I mean, they have very interesting synastry, so I understand why she probably felt like head over heels for him. And at one point she said, we were like magnets. We just found each other immediately and stuck together. Their Venuses are conjunct to the degree. So I thought that was so fascinating because that's like such a great explanation of that aspect. Yeah. Fuck Justin Timberlake.
Can I get a fuck Justin Timberlake in the chat?
Please.
It is before and after Justin Timberlake in this. She describes him moving to record his first solo album. And, as somebody that was in NSYNC, one of the biggest boy bands of all time, they were everywhere, highly popular. I could see Justin wanting to really distinguish himself with this first solo album and separate himself from this boy band thing, right? So she describes him kind of slowly pushing her away, and she attributes that to him producing this album, which he later kind of made about her, even though she says that his description, his version of what happened is not exactly what her version is. So I got the sense that it was a media thing, like he used his breakup with somebody who was also very famous to garner extra attention for his album. He obviously made a music video with somebody that looked like her very intentionally. Not only did he break up with her via text, but he also basically invited the media and his fans to demonize her in this really big way. And for somebody who was already going through a really devastating breakup and after having that traumatic abortion, I feel like that was just a lot for her. And she describes this really deep depression that she enters after that point. It almost seems like that depression never really resolved in a lot of ways because the other circumstances of her life that continue for the next few years, it's very hard to say that that breakup was not a hugely significant moment for her because she says that her family was never who she went home to. She says that Justin Timberlake's family during the 3 years that they were together were like family to her. So it was more than just the loss of a boyfriend. I think it was this connection to this other group of people that apparently made her feel really welcome and really safe in a way that she didn't feel from her own family. So it is really devastating.
She described in the book how she was felt safe with his family, and that was devastating to lose because they had known each other since Mickey Mouse Club. Like, they grew up together. She considered these people like her parents. She really desired a romantic relationship. She had this idealized image of what love is, and she's like such a romantic at heart, the way that she speaks about it. Just feel terrible that she was so unlucky in love.
Yeah, and it seems like the problems that she had with her family, as much as she expressed love and appreciation for her family at this time, it seems like by her account, things were not perfect. There has been this continuous search for, I think, partnership in some way with her, whether that is with her family or, her romantic partners. She does have that fifth house moon. She is very romantic, and a lot of her music revolves around intense romantic feelings. I think she's very aware of that desire of hers and, kind of plays with it a lot in what she makes. So it makes complete sense to me that losing this 3-year relationship at such an early age and also at a time where she was hugely successful would be very devastating, because for her being as famous as she was,
there's like a lot of vested interest in her succeeding. So her having like any sort of needing to take time off to rest, there was such pressure for her to like get back to work. They're like, you need to be over this. You need to get back to recording, get back on the road. Like, this is ridiculous. How dare you? She wasn't allowed to grieve this properly.
In fact, she says that her father showed up with 3 men and forced her to do a interview with Diane Sawyer shortly after that in her apartment. I watched that interview.
It's heartbreaking.
It's really hard to watch because if you review all of the stuff from back then, again, it's 20 years ago, you can see how much the culture has changed in 20 years once you kind of revisit this material, because the way that Diane Sawyer is talking to someone who's barely an adult, really going at her about what she wears and if she feels responsible, for children listening to her, grilled her about her body. She was only 21 when this interview happened. She asks her about the breakup with Justin Timberlake, says you must have done something for him to be this publicly emotional about it. She asked if Britney had a shopping addiction. The tone of it was very disrespectful in a lot of ways. The huge demand for these invasive questions to be answered, and knowing what was going on in the background at that time makes it all the more disturbing to watch. She cried during that interview, and she says that she was, embarrassed about it. She looks embarrassed in the interview. And of course, that all got aired.
It was also very accusatory. Britney having to backpedal a little bit. Yeah, like you said, just knowing what she was going through in the background with all of this and still dealing with the breakup. I would have said, fuck you.
Yeah, she's incredibly composed, I think, considering what is happening. And again, we hear that echo of what did you do to Justin Timberlake, which was kind of the vibe at the time.
Yeah, he was blaming infidelity on her when he was actually the one that was cheating, and she was just like, what? Like, so confused by it.
She does admit to cheating, which is really funny because she's straight up about, yes, I was not faithful. But what she does say is that she knew that Justin Timberlake was sleeping around throughout their whole relationship. She never said anything about it, which, I mean, could the Libra rising be? I just felt like just the politeness.
Yeah, that's the Southern girl in her. Like, you just let it go, like, noted.
Look the other way.
Okay, I'll go do this because I guess that's the standard now.
Her cheating was she went out with Wade Robson, who is a choreographer who did some stuff with NSYNC and many other performers, and apparently they kissed, and that was her big cheat. So I was kind of like, oh, sweet Britney. And she's honest about it. She owns up to it. She says she told Justin Timberlake, she was honest about it. She didn't lie to him. She does not drag this guy as hard as I think she could have. She doesn't drag anyone as hard as I think she could have. I was kind of hoping that she would drag him a little bit. So I will.
It's funny. A lot of the undertones is very like, oh, bless your heart, you know.
I could see Justin Timberlake running with that kiss as, oh, she cheated on me, even if he was cheating on her the whole time. She says that she never brought it up with him. So I wonder if she ever said anything to him about it. I don't know what their private conversations were or what happened between them. She doesn't really get into it, but I wonder if that was ever discussed between the two of them, or if he just kind of like took the kiss and was like, yeah, that's enough for me to make an album accusing her of cheating. Because honestly, men who cheat, if you kiss some other guy, that can be the most offensive thing. And it's like, well, where's your dick been?
Yeah, they're just totally projecting.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So I would not be surprised if that is what happened. I have obviously, this is pure speculation at this point.
He's just a footnote in her story, really.
At this point, you know, Britney is kind of going through it for the next several years. It feels like we also had Justin Timberlake giving interviews, and people were asking him if he had slept with Britney Spears due to the virginity conversation that was almost relentless around her. People were asking if he had slept with Britney Spears, and he said that he had, and he was very bro-y and laughing about the whole thing, and it was all very funny.
So smug.
This was like right around the time that she did that movie Crossroads. She mentioned that she got stuck in character essentially doing that performance, which I thought was really interesting because I had not seen Crossroads until we just watched it last night. And it's about a girl who's graduating high school and she's very nerdy. She's valedictorian and she's pretty much spent her entire high school career studying. And so she's missed out on a lot of the fun stuff. And her and two of her ex-friends take a road trip with some dude and, you know, things happen. That's pretty much the plot of the movie. But she took that project so seriously that she apparently...
Method acting.
She was accidentally method acting, and she said that she actually got stuck in that character to the point where Justin Timberlake was like, why are you acting like this? Because she was behaving differently than she normally did, which is really funny because you watch the movie and I'm like, she could have just played herself.
I think that's what they wanted.
She could have just played herself. And I mean, this is a movie that was designed for Britney Spears. Like the premise of the movie is created. It's a vehicle for Britney Spears to be in a movie. It was written specially for her. She got stuck in character as this girl, Lucy. Apparently that prevented her from doing any movies in the future because she felt that it would be too stressful, I guess, that it was just too much on her, which I think I found it really endearing, honestly, like that she, you know, at that young age was so eager to do a good job that she completely like submersed herself in this role. I guess that's that Neptune in the third, right? She really, and she's also got her moon in the fifth house. Like she probably just developed this emotional connection to this character and was able to kind of slip right into it in a certain way. But I do lament the fact that we never got more Britney Spears movies because I would have gladly had a movie marathon.
Yeah, she had the Cap Venus as well. Like she was just a little engine that could. She kind of loved that. She talked about how she had creative input into the movie because they were they were like crafting this around her. So it is kind of funny that she slipped into this character to kind of like she had to build like a structure between her actual lived experience and this character she was playing in the movie. It's fascinating. And it was interesting that she later turned down doing Chicago because she was scared to fall into that character again and get stuck. But she kind of wishes she did now. She was kind of behaving in a way that she thought other people would expect of her. Kind of that Libra rising. She just wanted to keep the peace. She's like, I'm just so thankful that these people are letting me execute some of my creative vision. I think she was like kind of compromising where she didn't necessarily need to, because it was through her creativity and the things that she was doing that she was successful, because it was authentic. Like she was having fun doing it. And that's kind of where the best creativity happens.
She has this movie come out. She takes a road trip after the breakup. She talks about kind of her spiritual understanding. I felt like she did a good job of kind of weaving through the narrative.
She has just like this spiritual almost like enlightened moment on the road, which is funny with that Neptune in the third house.
They were in the desert, and she said she felt God in the desert. She said, even in the darkest night, you can still find so much light. You know, she's doing her thing, learning how to be an independent single woman. She kind of starts dating. There was a really funny section about her dating Colin Farrell, which apparently started because she just showed up at the set of his movie and was like interested in meeting him, and they just hit it off, and I guess they had like a couple-week fling, which she describes as a 2-week brawl of them grappling passionately. I don't know if you guys know this, but Colin Farrell famously had a sex tape leaked. I've accidentally seen pieces of this thing. I wasn't looking for it. Good for her, is all I'm saying. I'm just saying, good for her. I'm glad that she had some fun after this breakup. You know, they went to a movie premiere together. You can find these photos of them together. It's just a funny thing that these two people who you would never necessarily like put together had this fling at a certain point, and there's like record of it. You can just like look up a picture of Colin Farrell and Britney Spears. She also talks about, you know, the paparazzi being more of a thing at this point. She was incredibly famous. It seems like there's like a couple years here where she was just kind of, she's still working and doing her thing, but there was not like a major relationship happening. She was still seemingly recovering from the breakup with Justin. And then in 2004, she decides to party and then get married in Vegas to a childhood friend of hers. She said that her family pretty much showed up right away in Vegas and were like, you have to annul this. So that was kind of the first instance that I recall in the book of seeing her family kind of intervening in her career, was this moment where she did this crazy thing in Vegas. And I remember when that happened, it was such a big media scandal that like, oh my God, Britney Spears, because she went through like it's a wedding chapel in Vegas. It was completely random feeling. And the media made a whole lot of it. And then her family shows up and 55 hours later, the marriage was annulled. So it was just so quick how they moved into action. And she said from her perspective, it was kind of all fun and games. And she honestly didn't even remember it very much because of all the partying that they were doing. She said they were just drinking, hanging out in Vegas, I guess. That is the period where I kind of remember this narrative of Britney being off the rails started. That was what I remember, is that moment being kind of the beginning of the next few years of her behavior being so scrutinized by paparazzi and media to the point where, you know, she was portrayed as being really erratic. So that was part 1 of our conversation about Britney, and part 2 comes out next week. This episode was produced by Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can sign up for free updates over on Patreon, and paid members get all kinds of cool bonus content. In 2024, I'm also offering a monthly new moon manifesting circle where I'll go through the astrology of each new moon and show you how you can use it to manifest. Group work can be really powerful in helping you manifest, and spots are limited, so go check that out on Patreon.